Welcome to Lecture 21, The Philosophes, the Triumph of the French Enlightenment. In our last lecture, we talked about the shift away from abstract, metaphysical, and speculative issues to concern for the causes of remediable human suffering. One sees this in so many ways in the 18th century, in the Scottish Enlightenment and the movement of Hume from abstract philosophy to histories that he thought would be of political and moral utility to his countrymen, in the shift from Adam Smith's work on moral theory to Adam Smith's work on economics and the conditions of human prosperity and wealth. But nowhere is this shift more dramatically seen than in the movement that has come to be called the French Enlightenment. And in this lecture, we shall talk about that movement and its triumph in France and in so many ways in the Western world. In the mid-18th century in France, there emerged a community of thinkers and writers around certain shared attitudes toward the new philosophy, toward arbitrary authority, toward the church, and toward the role of the informed man of letters in the society in which he found himself. This community of thinkers and writers saw itself as part of something that it termed quite explicitly the Republic of Letters, a republic in which figures would be judged by the quality of their work, by their contribution toward human understanding. In their self-image, this community of thinkers in France saw itself quite dramatically as standing between a sad past of human superstition, despotism, ignorance, and suffering on the one hand, and a possible future of human enlightenment in which, freed of the presumptive authority of the past, empirically derived knowledge could be applied toward the reduction of human suffering and an increase in human well-being. This is a remarkable moment in the history of human consciousness, this generation that quite literally thought of itself as leading humanity into a new relationship with nature and into new possibilities of human society, human community, and ways of living human lives. It is a community that redefines the meaning of the term philosopher, and they appropriate the name for themselves, les philosophes. Technically, the philosophers, but henceforth the philosophers of the French Enlightenment. Les philosophes, working to alleviate the remediable causes of human suffering, to apply knowledge in manners useful to mankind. They are diverse in their social and indeed in their educational origin, but they recognize each other by common values, common interests, and often above all, by common opponents. They coalesce around certain institutions. There are cafes, salons, patrons, and academies of the Enlightenment, and they coalesce around certain shared ideas. The rejection of inherited authority per se, the commitment, in theory at least, to empirical evidence, rational analysis, and the belief that nature was our sole source of knowledge and of value, and by a common ethical principle that they share, and one that does not sound the least bit pedestrian to them, the principle of utility. The view that the happiness of the human species is the highest value, and that all things may be judged by their contribution either to human suffering or to the alleviation of that suffering and human happiness. These values, natural and secular, and the philosophers' competition with the clergy for the role of the educator of their society, of their civilization, lead Enlightenment thinkers into a fundamental conflict with the Roman Catholic Church of 18th century France. Indeed, anti-clericalism was the most common denominator of the Enlightenment. Primarily deistic, with a very small current of atheism, to which we will turn later in this course, the Enlightenment believed that God spoke to mankind through nature and nature alone, and that the priests, historically and in their present society, had usurped and falsified God's voice in sectarian religions. Their debate with the church centers around the most fundamental issues, the critical issue of tolerance and censorship, religious toleration and the right of minds to think, explore, write, and communicate what they believe about the world. Around profoundly differing histories of the world, of Europe, of their own nation of France, and profoundly differing analyses of their societies. They debated the rejection of traditional authority and of supernatural claims. Think on that drama. A clergy that is educating the philosophers as young men, a clergy that is educating all of France, and a group of writers who have won the affection and loyalty of the reading public, who are saying traditional authority has no presumptive claim on us, and the supernatural is no source of knowledge, authority, or value. The priority of secular over religious concerns. That the goal of things, the goal of one's own life, the goal of one's society was secular, was not with reference to the supernatural, things above or beyond nature, a world to come. And there is a mutual identification by both philosophers and the church of each other as their antithesis, as their deepest foe. One of the major agencies of the organization and dissemination of the Enlightenment was the project of what was known in French as the encyclopédie, the encyclopedia, intended to be a great encyclopedia of human knowledge and produced largely under the editorship of Denis Diderot. In the early history of the encyclopedia, a simple decision was made by a consortium of French publishers to produce a French encyclopedia to compete with several similar and successful British publications. The publishers selected a group of scholars to work on this and named two Enlightenment thinkers as editors: the prudent mathematician Jean-Laurent d'Alembert and the impetuous Denis Diderot. D'Alembert and Diderot projected and convinced the consortium of publishers to produce a vast work that would be a sanctuary of all acquired human knowledge and experience, that would provide a bridge to the future, that would be a barrier against any new dark ages. Diderot would write, "A new barbarian invasion could come. The last one destroyed all European learning. But if one copy of the encyclopedia survives, the human mind will be able to reconstruct human knowledge." He believes that about this work because the encyclopedia reflects the essential Baconian and Lockean vision that one communicates not merely what we know, what we believe we know, one communicates how we came to know it on the basis of what experience and experiments one has come to know what one now knows. Communicate that and method along with conclusion, and knowledge has been secured. The encyclopedia reflects the Enlightenment's profoundly expanded notion of what constitutes significant human knowledge. For it includes not simply philosophy, but history, the arts, letters, and most interestingly, technology. The mechanical and technical inventions that are changing the human relationship to the application of human power to nature and to production. The encyclopedia becomes an extraordinarily ambitious publication and in many ways the essential publication of the 18th century. At first, to be published in a few large volumes between 1751 and 1754, the encyclopedia grows to 17 massive volumes of text published between 1751 and 1765, and 11 volumes of technical plates published between 1765 and 1772 that demonstrate the means of production, the nature of machines, the nature of techniques available to human life in the 18th century. The encyclopedia is a runaway bestseller, and it is frequently sold in pirated editions, not paying any royalties to its authors and costing the consortium of publishers great fortunes, but spreading the fame of the work. And as a both legal and pirated bestseller, it spreads the knowledge and the self-image of the Enlightenment across the face of Europe. So popular is it that there scarcely is a library that you are near, hearing or seeing me, that does not have a copy. And for the drama, I urge you to sit with a copy in front of you, open, of the articles and the technical plates of the encyclopedia of the 18th century. It is an intellectually and humanly thrilling experience. It engaged over 160 writers and another 100 or so informal consultants in its work, drawing into its orbit and its frame of reference the expertise and the scholarship of lay and, which sometimes caused scandal in the church, even clerical France. The encyclopedia embodies a dramatic intellectual vision whose tone and agenda are set by the preliminary discourse to the encyclopedia written by D'Alembert in 1751. For D'Alembert in the preliminary discourse, there had been a rebirth of knowledge in the 17th century. And through the acquisition of proper method, a qualitative change in human thought in the 17th century that had altered our ability to know and to acquire real knowledge of the world in which we found ourselves. And that knowledge, D'Alembert explained, was a human power to understand all natural things and to alter what could be altered, which is why the technological side of the encyclopedia, its sense that human beings are not in a static, fixed, fatalistic, helpless relationship to nature. Why that is such a dramatically important side of this work. The encyclopedia provides a focus and a means of diffusion for the worldview and for the scholarship and the analyses of the new philosophy. It embodies a need to reset the priorities of knowledge. Thus, it has articles on invention, diplomacy, philosophy. No article on Jesus Christ in this encyclopedia. It embodies the need and the right to question the origins and foundations of all authorities, all beliefs, and all institutions. Every one of these things is open to examination by the free human mind. And it embodies the belief that given proper and methodical use of the human mind, there will be intellectual progress, cumulative changes in human knowledge, and it celebrates the dynamism of secular inquiry, of science, and of human technology. The encyclopedia, struggling again and again for the right to publish, is in and of itself an education for Europe and above all for France of the need for freedom of inquiry and expression, frequently attacked and occasionally suppressed. The encyclopedia draws its authors and its experts and its readers into the drama of censorship, the issue of which now can be presented. You have the right to communicate, and to its vast audience, you have the right to read and to think for yourselves. The encyclopedia finds agents of collusion and support in the highest structures of the old regime, in the courts, in the ministries, indeed in the aristocracy, indeed in the very royal agency that is supposed to be censoring it. It has at the leadership of that agency its most ardent supporter and admirer. The very existence of the encyclopedia, as well as its contents, is corrosive upon the sacred idols and established intellectual authorities of its culture, and it plays a major role in establishing the consciousness of this movement that more and more comes to call itself the party of humanity or the party of reason. That is the encyclopedist's self-image. But increasingly, it is their image in a culture in which they are winning the war for public opinion. The Enlightenment is a diverse set of phenomena, but the culture recognizes the heart of it in the claim that so much existing authority, intellectual, religious, political, and social, is arbitrary authority arising from power and tradition alone. The Enlightenment, and it is important to understand this, does not assail authority per se, in and of itself, but arbitrary authority. And in countless works, it calls upon existing authority to justify itself. But justification demands criteria. So what are the criteria of the Enlightenment? Two above all: natural experience and utility. In terms of natural experience, the Enlightenment is Lockean. Claims to justify authority must be social, they must be communicable, they must be verifiable. The commitment to natural experience as the source of knowledge and value and justification has dramatic implications for education. Change experience, change education, and you change the individual and the world composed of those individuals. Though there is dramatic debate within the Enlightenment over the role of environment and the role of physical constitution. What is from nurture, what is from nature, is a very intense 18th century debate. The agreement is that it is an empirical debate to be decided by the facts of the world. A philosopher named Helvetius and the philosopher Diderot, our editor, will argue over the implications of Locke. Helvetius will write, if I and my valet had been switched in our cribs, my valet would be writing works of philosophy, I would be putting on his cloak. Diderot believes that there is a strong inheritance of children from parents, of very deep qualities, including things such as intelligence and gifts and aptitudes. And that is very much an 18th century debate. The other implication of natural experience is anti-supernaturalism, that our knowledge being bounded by natural experience, that no supernatural justification for authority carries any weight whatsoever. Utility, the other major criterion of the Enlightenment, is the experimental side of moral theories, that all things are to be judged by their contribution to human happiness or human suffering. That is the ultimate ethical criterion. But this is a criterion that is no means unproblematic and initiates some of the great debates of the 19th and 20th century. Do we think of happiness as individual happiness or as the happiness of society, as something collective? Do we think of happiness in physical and sensual terms? Do we think of happiness as psychological above all? There is a great debate over whether there is a happiness to virtue itself, or whether society must structure rewards for virtue so that they bring about happiness. One intriguing solution is by a philosopher by the name of Chastellux, who is third in command of the French armies in the American War of Independence, who says everyone has a different notion of happiness. The way to judge public happiness, the way to judge societies, is by the amount of time a civilization leaves each individual to pursue his or her own private vision of happiness. As Chastellux puts it, in any given society, there is a certain amount of time that you must spend to have enough to eat, the means of subsistence. So technology, productivity affects that. Then there are the demands of the state. Are you spending 12 hours a day building the pharaoh's tombs? Or are you spending 12 hours a day working to pay for standing armies, right? That's A plus B. The state's demands on time, subsistence demands on time. C is your total amount of time. Subtract A and B from C, Shastaluk's writes, and you can judge a society by its contribution to real happiness, how much each individual has to pursue his or her own private vision. From the 1750s on, Europe witnesses the triumph of the Enlightenment. There is a voluminous literary output from the philosophers. Each year, scores and then hundreds of Enlightenment works, large and small, which become the rage. The church is on the defensive. Every act of censorship and scandal excites the interest of the reading public. And the battle cry and most successful issue of the Enlightenment is toleration. You have the right to judge for yourself. It will win first the battle of public opinion and then the state itself. One Enlightenment work in the 1760s argues that the king, if he thought it in the interest of peace in his society, could establish religious toleration. The argument is set in ancient Rome in a work called Belissaire by Marmontel, but the issue is clear for France. The church begins to draft, after it has formally censured Belissaire, a document saying the King of France has no right to proclaim toleration. And now the crown comes in and says to the church, don't you dare. The Enlightenment is winning the struggle for public opinion. And nowhere is that more obvious than in Voltaire's passionate and, in terms of Europe's conscience, ultimately successful campaigns on issues of toleration. Voltaire will take cases of what he believes to be the judicial murder and torture of Protestants in France, the Calas family, the Servan family, or of free thinkers, Labarre, who is accused, a young aristocrat, of having defaced a crucifix. His tongue is ripped from his mouth while he's alive. He is put to death. Among the evidence cited against him, he owned Voltaire's philosophical dictionary. They found it in his apartment. Voltaire will campaign and successfully storm the battlements of European conscience on the issue of torture and religious hatred and religious persecution. The ascent of the Enlightenment to privilege itself, to sinecures, high positions, honors in the old regime, shows us that this is not merely among the reading public, but among officials of the state as well, that this triumph is occurring. And before the French Revolution, the old regime in France will grant religious toleration in increasing levels and will put an end to all torture and all serfdom that remains in France. The Enlightenment represents nothing less than a battle for the soul of Europe. Who will advise and teach the culture? The clergy of the church or the secular naturalist intellectuals? The Enlightenment embodies profound tensions and debates. It wants reform, but there is no agreement about by whose agencies, by whose power. It wants us to learn from and follow nature, but it disagrees about the meaning of nature. It wants thought to reach the freest possible conclusions, but there are the most searing debates between deists and later atheists in the Enlightenment. It is torn between optimism that human beings will succeed in making themselves less miserable, more happy, and pessimism that human beings are so prone to error, so easily manipulated and ruled. The Enlightenment is torn between where to put its trust, between elitism and the cultivation of existing rulers and elites, and egalitarianism, giving more power to a people whose superstition, whose lack of knowledge, it so often fears. But the legacy of the Enlightenment is to change a civilization. Salman Rushdie, under sentence of death for mocking Islam in the 20th century, was asked, "What did you read during that first year?" He said, "A lot of Montesquieu, a lot of Voltaire." Islam did not have its enlightenment. Its legacy is a free science, the primacy of a secular society, the ideal of religious toleration, the view that government exists in the service of citizens, not that citizens exist in the service of government. And its major legacy is an endless series of debates with which we still live. Thank you very much.